quickly going through Lakeview and down to the Big Bridge. Now, one of the things, Presbyterianism in the town, there was an article by, what's his name, Lindsay Brown, is it? In the Clogher Record. And he's written two essays in the Clogher Record of 1990, and there's one in 1995, I think, this is part two on him. Now, I tried reading it again. I know nothing. I'm not going to talk about Christian doctrines or religious teachings, a pure history just of the churches and of the people who are involved in these. It is complicated now to start talking about the seceding churches and the Westminster Confession of Faith and those who didn't subscribe, and we had non-subscribers and we had subscribers, and also it becomes very complicated. So I'm going to keep this fairly simple, particularly in relation to the breakaways and why one breaks away from another. And I'm still not quite sure why some of the breakaways took place. I think it's more personal. People in one congregation. The Presbyterians have the great weakness in that they're democratic. And so they all sit around, they have a vote, and then they decide to split. And off they go out the road and form another church out the road. Whereas the Catholics in the Church of Ireland don't get that chance, since we are dictatorships and the Pope tells you what to do, and that's it. There's no question. I think it's the right thing to do, it's the wrong thing to do. But anyway, Presbyterianism in the town. We had Presbyterians that have been in the town since 1718. And it's very unusual. The English had an intense fear of the Catholics and the Presbyterians in Ireland. The reason being, of course, that in 1715, James III, who was a member of the Stuart clan, and the English were terrified that all the Catholics in Ireland would rise up and support the old pretender. This is a son of King William, King James, who fought King William at the Battle of the Boyne and all that. They also were of Scottish descent, and they thought because they were Scottish that they would have supported the Stuarts as well. And therefore they were afraid that the Catholics and the Presbyterians would get together and form a military alliance and overthrow the English authorities. For that reason, the penal laws were introduced in Ireland. Presbyterians were slightly different from the way the penal laws were against the Catholics. For example, the English authorities had to recognise a Catholic Mass as being a legitimate religious ceremony for the simple reason that all the kings of Europe were all Catholics, and if we didn't recognise the Catholic, they could call all the kings of Europe illegitimate. Right? However, they didn't recognise the Presbyterian Church, so that weddings in Presbyterian churches were not recognised as being official weddings. Therefore, the children in Presbyterian marriages were considered illegitimate and couldn't inherit. And there was all sorts of different penal laws which under as much as the Catholics gave, those slightly different. The Presbyterians in huge numbers in the early 1700s, of course, decided to emigrate to America, and it was they started the American Revolution and got rid of the English out of America. But anyway, back at home here, and in County Monaghan, there were sort of different places Presbyterians were arrested and were badly treated, but in Castleblayney they weren't. Lord Blaney had great time for the Presbyterians who were in the area in 1718, and in 1718 he wrote to the Belfast Synod and he asked them to provide the local Presbyterians with a minister, and the man he picked was Samuel Hempels. There's the one who went to Pennsylvania and caused a lot of hassle over in Pennsylvania. But the Samuel Hempel who was here in Ireland was a very well-educated man. He wrote a number of famous treatises on religious topics. And eventually, Lord Blaney managed to convince him to come here to Castleblayney and to become. And he was inaugurated in Castleblayney in August of 1718 as the local minister. They kept writing to the Synod in Belfast looking for money in those days so they could build a church or get a church going. But for 10 years, right on, they didn't have a permanent place, and it's probably in private houses or in other places. But anyway, Samuel Hempel was here, and he wrote a lot of major scriptural writings. I'm not going to tell you the religious ends of it. And he was the minister here for at least 10 years, I think, raising his family. And he was the minister here for at least 10 years, I think, raising his family. All the time, places all over the north, particularly up in County Antrim, wanted to get Samuel Hempel to come up to their church because he was so famous. But he did stay in Blaney for a certain length of time. They continued on the Congress, particularly up in County Antrim, wanted to get Samuel Hempel to come up to their church because he was so famous, but he did stay in Blaney for a certain length of time. They continued on, the congregation grew, Lord Blaney kept supporting them, and then in 1738, they applied to Lord Blaney for a site to build a church, Blaney for a certain length of time. They continued on, the congregation grew, Lord Blaney kept supporting them, and then in 1738, they applied to Lord Blaney for a site to build a church. And this is the site that they picked down in Drumillan Big. This was the site that was given. And the lease, in 1738, they applied to Lord Blaney for a site to build a church. And this is the site that they picked down in Drumillan Big. This was the site that was given. And the lease, oh gosh, back to that in a moment. The lease for the Castleblayney, you can see it there, it's a lease dated the 16th of May, 1738. And they had about 3 lives on it. The lives of Thomas, the son of James McBurney, Alexander, the son of the Reverend Samuel Hempel, and William, the son of John McKee. And these were on 16th of May, 1738. This site was given to the Presbyterian Church to build their church on it. Now, there's no big bridge on the Cady Road, so I'm assuming the road down past the church was a cul-de-sac, that they would have gone down to the end of the road and the church was there. Now, and Lexi told me that the original church that was built on the site was built parallel to the road. There was a smaller building built somewhere along the front of the site, and that building stood from 1738 until 1797. And then eventually a man called the minister at the time and his assistant, James Harper, who lived in that house across here in the square, and they decided to build the Presbyterian Church as it is today. And it was built in 1797. Impressive building. It's been on that site since then. Just going to walk around and drift into on a quiet evening if you want to go around it. Unfortunately, it's each time you win, there's more and more people you recognise that you know in it. Now, Presbyterians, as I say, do tend to split. And at some stage in the 1750s, there's one of the minister, Reverend Macaulay, I'm not sure why, but he had to apologise to Lord Blaney over something that he had said. And as a result of that, we then have the drift out and we have the founding of Second Presbyterian, which is Frankfurt, out the Warden Road. And it was split of doctrine and the seceding of church, or whether it was a question of money or a question of personalities, but they did split. On Second Presbyterian then broke away from First Presbyterian, so we now have 2 Presbyterian churches. Until another row with the Reverend Longmore, who was appointed by Lord Blaney above the congregation in Frankfurt. Some of them broke away and they went out to Germany's Grove. And Hugh Germany provided them with a site out the road, which became Germany's Grove. So Germany's Grove had broken away then from Second Presbyterian. And at some stage, Second Presbyterian came back with the First Presbyterian. And there's a number of, it's a bit like Flanagan's ball. I mean, he stepped out and he stepped in again. And some of it is, as I say, is in relation to doctrine, and some is in relation to, I think, money as much as anything else, and personalities and one thing and another. And they eventually continue to split. But this Presbyterian Church, First Castleblayney, as it's called, has been there since 1797. And Mr. is quite old when the church was built. And I think it could be one of his last actions that he actually got it built. And then the man who took over was the Reverend Harper. And James Harper lived across the street here with his wife Mary in the little house here beside the gatehouse on the other side. And we lived in the house. That when Harper died, members of the congregation felt that they should get the house back. But Mrs. Harper wanted to continue living in it. Anyway, Mrs. Harper stayed in the house for about another 50 years and continued to live in it. Her daughter married a minister called Topham, who went to Longmouth called Topham, who eventually came back to Castleblayney, lived in Father Seamus's house up in Church Street. And the last of Tophams then married John G. Reid, the solicitor. They were the continuation of the Harper family. And you tend to find with the press, and that Lindsay Brown's essays with a whole splits and breaking away and breaking away. But the Presbyterian Church has been there continuously now, however, like it's 316 years, 6 years, whatever it is, and on the same basically on the same site. There are a number of different things which tend to happen. One of these grove, there were things called, and I'm not 100% sure what the theological meanings are. They were called seceding congregations and non-seceding, and they tended to be different, with slightly different teachings, different fundamentals, shall we say. And Garmley's Grove teachings, different fundamentals, shall we say. And Garmley's Grove seemed to have been different. And in around about the year 1900 to 1920, Garmley's Grove was the only seceding Presbyterian church in the whole of County Monaghan. Right? All the others had come in with County Monaghan. Right? All the others had come into line, shall we say. And a man was appointed to Garmley's Grove called Lewis, Reverend Lewis. And I think he's the man who was the goalkeeper on the hockey team in 1905, playing up on Laurel Hill. But anyway, the Reverend Lewis was sent out to Garmley's Grove in order to get them, shall we say, back into the fold. And it's very unusual in that essay because the congregation at Garmley's Grove were different. That when they sang hymns, they sat down, and they sang their hymns sitting down. Whereas all the other, both not only Presbyterians but Catholics in the Church of Ireland as well, when they sang a hymn, you stood up. But they sat down to sing the hymn, and then when they were saying prayers, they stood up and turned their back to the altar with their back to the minister. Now, I don't know what the meanings of those different things are, but Reverend Lewis went out in 1914 and eventually managed to persuade the Garmley's Grove congregation to switch and to, shall we say, do it properly or do it the way everybody else was doing it. And about 1914, the congregation. And as far as I know today, Garmley's Grove and the Calvarys are acting together, and Second Presbyterian Frankfurt and Castleblayney are acting as one today. The Frankfurt name comes from the town in Germany, of course, and it's something which came from America. It was part of the seceding traditions, were seceding churches. Well, I'm not sure, don't ask me to explain Christian doctrine, but Frankfurt was given that name. It's nothing to do with a place in Castleblayney. There was a story I read somewhere that Frankfurt was called Frankfurt because the ford of the river beside it, and there's a family plan. It's not. It's definitely, it comes from Pennsylvania, where the Frankfurt tradition started, and it's people who are not as strictly orthodox as whatever it is. Lindsay Brown's article is complicated. You want to read it a few times before you understand all the different doctrines are about. It's nice, probably in some cases, just give them a catechism and tell them to learn it off by heart. Maybe I told you this story before about authority in the churches. Did I tell you that one? The local Catholic bishop of Farr and the local rector of the Presbyterian Church in Monaghan were sitting and they were having a discussion at a meal. And they were discussing authority in the churches. So they asked the Church of Ireland bishop, how did authority work in the Church of Ireland? He said, well, it's the pyramid structure. The bishop is at the top and he makes the authority, and the authority passes down to the priests and that passes down to the people. So they asked the Presbyterian minister, how did authority work in the Presbyterian Church? And he said they believe in the concentric theory. The minister's at the centre, and the authority comes out from the centre towards the people who are on the outside. So then they asked Bishop, comes out from the centre towards the people who are on the outside. So then they asked Bishop Mulligan, how did authority work in the Catholic Church? And he says, we use the mushroom theory. Says Bishop Mulligan, what's the mushroom theory? Keep them in the dark and feed them plenty of shit. Keep them in the dark and feed them plenty of shit. Anyway, moving on. One of the most famous ministers in the Presbyterian congregation We're in the middle of the 19th century when a man called the Reverend Thomas Boyd arrived. We're in the middle of the 19th century when a man called the Reverend Thomas Boyd arrived in Lakeview. And Thomas Boyd, of course, is David Boyd's great-grandfather, right? And he was the minister here for many, many years. It appears his wife was Mossman. Would that be right? Mossman. There's a name on the headstone, Sarah Mossman, who's mentioned here as possibly his wife. I was a wee bit confused because it didn't call her Sarah Boyd. It says buried with him then is Sarah Mossman, who's the daughter of Mossman and is the granddaughter of Erwin the doctor in town. And I'd have to look up just to see where Mossman's Boyds had the shop in the main street and owned the houses down in Lakeview as well. The Reverend Thomas was the first of the Boyds to come to the town. He was here from the 1830s, and he owned what we call the 7 houses. Now, as you come up from the Presbyterian Church, we have on the left-hand side there houses which are known as, no, there aren't 7 houses there today. There were, we think, original 7 houses, which obviously is where they call the 7 houses. There were 2 other houses further up at Fairley Grants Lane, and they were called Island View, right? And there are 2 houses there. Today, Farnham's are in one, and Mrs. Murphy's in the other one. 2 houses. There were very few other houses, apart from the Presbyterian Rectory, which was down beside the church. Then a major industrial work took place down in Lakeview, and this was the gasworks. And the gasworks was built where the factory, where the boot factory was. Gasworks was built where the factory, where the boot factory was, where it was in the corner. And that is a photograph, the best one I could get. You see the church and so on there on the left-hand side. You can see the White House away out the Cady Road. But the one here on the front here is the gasworks at the bottom of, at the corner. But the one here on the front here is the gasworks at the bottom of, at the corner of Lakeview and the Bog Road. Okay? And the way the gasworks was built about 1850. And the way it worked was they took in coal and they burned the coal in the big chimneys there where the coal was burnt. And it produced a gas which would catch chimneys there where the coal was burnt. And it produced a gas which would catch fire. Unfortunately, the gas had no smell and no taste. So if you took it into your house, it could take over your whole house and smother everybody in the house. So what they did was they had big tanks of ammonia liquid. And they bumped through the ammonia liquid. And so the gas picked up the smell of ammonia. And the smell of ammonia, of course, is very strong. So then the gas now smelled of ammonia. And they pumped the gas into a huge tank. You see this one here? Which is called a gasometer. It's like a giant balloon ground in England, which it was up and down as you fill it full of gas. It's like rubber. And they would put the gas into this big balloon thing and it would fill up. And then at the top of it, there was like a vice, right? And then you could press down, squeeze it down, and the gas would come up the street and into all the houses in Castleblayney. And the houses were all lit between 1850 and 1920 by gas. Now, the gas in the houses in Castleblayney only went to the ground floor of the houses, and mostly were the shops. So you had a little pipe coming out on the wall of your shop, gas bulb on it, and that would light up your shop. Some of the ground floor rooms in some of the houses, I know our kitchen had one because I remember seeing there the gas. There was one outside the front of the Hope Arms Hotel, at the very front of it, and of course all along the street, gas lighter, and he would flick open the wee glass thing and he'd light the gas, switch it on, light the gas, close it, and then the next morning come back and put out the gas. And the gas continued to light the town, as I say, for about 70 years until electricity eventually comes. And that's where the gasworks was. Big, right? And chimneys. And of course, the lake down at that end is called the Gas Lake. And the wee road down past Fairgrounds with the gas road and so on. It's all in relation to the gasworks. And that was in Lakeview. So Lakeview suddenly is becoming, that particular site was the gasworks, a boot factory, there was a garage, it was all sorts of different things, but it started off as gasworks. Right? Now, this is the photograph, of course, of the Island View houses. The 2 houses are here. That's Farnham's and that's Mrs. Murphy's. But at the back, it's just completely open fields, right? There were no houses in that side of the road at all, and this, of course, is the boot factory, as it was, and became the boot factory obviously after when the gasworks was all closed down. The big house is still there. You see it there on the left. It's a big 2-story house that the manager of the gasworks lived in it. And then later on, it was still a private house at one stage. And as you come back up towards town, you now have the 7 houses at one stage. And as you come back up towards town, you now have the 7 houses. Now, to those who know it, there aren't 7 houses, but if you go along and look at David Boyd's house, which is the first house here, there's quite obviously 3 windows, 1, 2, 3. So that was originally 3 houses, 2, 3. So that was originally 3 houses, which the Reverend Thomas Boyd owned. Now, Boyd's only owned the first 3 houses. The last 4 houses in the site belong to the McBurneys. That's McBurneys of Milltown Mill. They own, if you actually count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's where it looks to me like the original 7 houses were. Built in 1830, built to a style very unusual with the dormer windows at that period. Now, whether the dormers weren't original, I don't know. Now, Duffy's house, which is the end one, I'm not sure if it was part of the original 7 or whether it's a different house that's just been added on at the tail end of the little terrace. But those are the 7 houses. We shouldn't forget that's what they're called. Keep us going on it when we come to Wakefield. There's a list of the families who lived in some of those houses, by the way, on the 1911 census. And as I went down, I went looking at it. It's quite interesting. When you go to the bottom, you have the lecture hall, which is definitely there in March 1911. The Presbyterian Church, which is there. And the rector at that stage is Hastings Smythe, or Hastings Smith. Reverend Hastings Smith is living in it. And then you start to come up, you get John Somerville, who I think lived in the house that used to be on the edge of the graveyard there, down before you went to Drumsliff at one stage. Right. And originally that house, the man who lived in that house in 1901 was McPherson, who owned the mill, which later on became McElroy's factory. And the wee hill, as you went up there past the Presbyterian Church, was known as McPherson's Brae. Because when you look at the families who are here, these are the people living in the houses. Boyds are not living in the house at that stage. The Boyds are living in the end street, above the shop. Right. But what was interesting is when I looked at it, there's a man here called, was that Richard Bryan, or Bryany, with 9 windows on the front of it, which is a big house. But when you go back, Sorry. When you look at David Boyd's house, he's got 9 windows at the front of it. So by 1911, had there been 3 houses there originally, they've now been converted into one house with 9 windows on the front of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Have you noticed the cottage?
Yeah.
Well,
6, 7, 8, 9.
have you noticed the cottage?
Yeah.
Well,
but it must have been 3 houses originally and then converted into one big house. Now, David, when he was here the last time, told the great story about the toilets at the back of them. And apparently the toilets at the back of these houses had fireplaces in them. So you went into, apparently the toilets at the back of these houses had fireplaces in them. So you went into do your business and read the paper, you would light a fire in the toilet out the back. It was very unusual. Now, what the other 4 houses looked like, I'm assuming they were a similar design, but have been replaced by 2-story houses later on. And I've now a similar design, but have been replaced by 2-story houses later on. And I've now become single houses. The other people who live down there, Tessie Finnegan is on the list. Jane Quinn is on it, Farrelly's are on it. And when you come to the very top, the second and third names down are on it. And when you come to the very top, the second and third names down, William Hamilton and George Howe, or Howe, H-O-W-E, lived in the two houses, Farnham's and Murphy's house. And the William Hamilton who lived in the first of those two houses, the one along, and the William Hamilton who lived in the first of those two houses, the one along Philly Grant's Lane, right, was called William Hamilton, under the wonderful nickname of Bizarra Hamilton. I have no idea what a Bizarra is or why he was called Bizarra, but that was his nickname in the town, Bizarra Hamilton. And he's the man called Bizarra, but that was his nickname in the town, Bizarra Hamilton. And he's the man who accused Joe Boyle of going down the gas lane and stealing his chickens out of the back of his garden and was the row in the street with Joe Boyle. Anyway, this is the list of people who lived in Drumiller Big. Now, some of these houses were down the bog roads, on down towards Maguire's and on that side of the hill, the other side of the hill, away from the main road. David Boyd is John Gray appears to own the two houses beside Boyd's, and I assume that's Gray of the shop in the main street as well. The gas company are mentioned, and then, of course, the Presbyterian Church is down at the bottom of the list. By 1901, they're still called the Seven Houses, even though they're no longer seven houses. And the manse has been built. The manse was built about 1910, I think. The lecture hall about 1891. On a whole site of, that's 1930s, the building of Lakeview itself. Now, there was a dispute over the other side of the road, which was a field owned by the Presbyterian Church, and that the Presbyterian Church wanted £200 for the field, but the Urban Council only going to get them £170 for it. And there was a big dispute before eventually they agreed on it. But 90 years. Quite a strange building in the sense that whoever designed it, because some of the houses come forward. It's not a line of houses, like say the present is. Some of the houses come forward, but the ones on the other side of the street are single-story bungalows rather than two-story houses. And that side, whether you got a two-story house, and that's another social question as to how all these came. But anyway, that's the building of Lakeview. Then we have Minzanti Park. That's it on the water a couple of winters ago. And again, a lovely place to go. And as you come back up, you're into McGill's Stores. Now, McGill's Stores, of course, is the site of the original McMath's Tannery. Now, the McMaths had a tannery when their stuffy lived on this side of the street in the square, and there's such a smell and everything, they had to move it down until it was moved down to this site, and then eventually it was the... Now, the building at the end here, this part here, is the hearse house. And that's where they kept the hearse. Now, hearses are unusual things because the Croziers had a two-horse hearse. I would like to see a photograph, if anyone could ever get a photograph, of a funeral in Castleblayney with a two-horse. It'd be nice to know it. Sorry? Yeah, will one of those be Crozier's hearse? I'd like to know. Well, what I'd like to know is, did they share the hearse? In other words, did Croziers and Corrigans and whoever the others, and they all shared it, or did they? I know when there was motor hearses, they did share them.
The hearse was sitting out in the body yard, the wheelchair.
Right.
It was abandoned there.
The horse one?
No, aye.
No, right.
Sitting in.
Because later on, with motor hearses, they were very difficult to keep because the whole driver was done in first gear. And it never quite got up to 60 miles an hour. So, one of the traditions with the hearses, and one of the funeral traditions, I'll finish on this, there were two funeral traditions in Castleblayney. One was that when a man came out the hearse and he was bringing a coffin to a church, he always picked a route that went over water, that had a bridge on a road that went over a river, in some way bringing the deceased over water. Whether it's something to do with the Styx River or Greece or paying the ferryman or whatever that whole thing was about, with the Styx River or Greece or paying the ferryman or whatever that whole thing was about. But you brought the hearse over water. And all the people who died in Castleblayney originally between 1700 and 1760 were buried out in Mullindy, which is where the main graveyard was. But the coffins were taken out over Mullindy, which is where the main graveyard was. But the coffins were taken out over the water. They weren't taken round the road. They put them on a boat and they brought them over water. Even though the people who were going to the funeral went round the road, the actual coffin was taken out by boat and taken out to Mullindy. The actual coffin was taken out by boat and taken out to Mullindy, and there was a list of the people who were in Mullindy. And the second thing is that when a funeral went up the streets in Castleblayney, right, the shopkeepers put up half the shutters on the front windows. In those days, you'd have two shutters you could put on your windows, right? But they put up half one of the shutters. They half closed the window. I don't know why or where that tradition. I haven't been able to find that tradition in any other town except Castleblayney. But we closed half a shutter as the funerals came up the street. Yes, yeah. But why the shops put? I don't know.
We used to put it down halfway.
You put it down halfway. Yeah, there is this idea of the half window being covered rather than the full window when the funeral. Well, the rights are off, all right, okay, and you stand up alone in the corner and wait for them. There are certain places, but this idea of the half shutter puzzled me why those traditions as well. And as I say, the hearse house was down at the bottom of McGirr's stores, and that's where the hearse was kept. And I presume it was only taken out. It was only taken out for a few months. When the store, the end of the store there was the hearse house. Closures, I think, own the hearse, I think. But I don't know.
I remember part of this stuff the post shop.
Right. I need to share with. Did they share with?
I don't know because they had tried.
I know motor hearses were shared.
Very impressed.
Yeah.
And as a horse that their seat belt or that.
The plumes, interesting. Those are all the traditions. Anyway, we're heading 4 o'clock here. Possibly the present the next day if we can get these two. Some information on the present and as a social. And anyone who wants to draw the castle who's good at